Welcome back to Chronoverse, the show where we dig past the legends and find out how history actually happened. Last time, we watched Rome hit its watermark under the adoptive emperors, and then watched that whole system collapse the moment Marcus Aurelius handed power to his own son, Commodus. We ended with an assassination in a bathtub and an empire that never quite recovered its confidence. Today, we go back inside the palace, to the women who were running significant parts of that empire the entire time, and to the stories Rome told about them afterward. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you. The same Roman historians who wrote grand, sober accounts of emperors and battles turned into something close to gossip columnists the moment they wrote about the women closest to power. Wives, mothers, sisters, women who controlled fortunes, brokered successions, and in at least one case may have run the empire in everything but title, get remembered today mostly for scandal. Poisonings, affairs, depravity so exaggerated it reads like fan fiction written by their political enemies. So which parts are true? Which parts are Roman senators settling scores through the historical record? And which women actually held the kind of power that made men nervous enough to write about them that way? We're going to look at three of them. Livia, wife of Augustus, the woman rumor accused of poisoning half her own family to keep power in the bloodline, with almost no hard evidence behind it. Messalina, wife of Claudius, whose reputation for excess became so exaggerated it turned into a Latin insult that outlived the empire itself. And Agrippina the Younger, mother of Nero, who by some ancient accounts didn't just influence an emperor, she may have been functionally one, years before her son ever took the throne. Some of what follows is documented. Some of it is propaganda dressed up as history. Telling the two apart is most of the story.
Start with Livia, because she's the template every later story got measured against. She married Augustus in 38 BC and stayed married to him for 52 years, remarkable on its own in a world where imperial marriages were usually political and often brief. She wasn't a background figure. Augustus consulted her openly on state matters, had her portrait struck on coins, and gave her financial independence unusual for a Roman woman of any class. Historians still debate how much real political power she wielded versus how much was symbolic, but the fact that ancient writers even needed to ask the question tells you she wasn't invisible. Then Augustus started dying, slowly, over the summer of 14 AD, and that's where the rumors begin. The historian Tacitus, writing almost a century later and no friend to the imperial family he was chronicling, reported whispers that Livia had poisoned figs still on the tree, one she knew Augustus liked to pick himself, to clear the path for her son Tiberius to become emperor. He also reported that some blamed her for earlier deaths in the family, potential rivals to Tiberius, conveniently dying young. Here's the concrete, verifiable detail underneath all that suspicion. None of it is backed by a single contemporary source. Tacitus himself frames it as rumor, not fact. No trial, no confession, no physical evidence. What we actually have is a pattern, a woman with real influence, and a historical record written by men who found female political power inherently suspicious, ready to fill every convenient death with a poisoning story. That pattern is the real subject of this video, not whether Livia was a murderer, whether murderer was simply the easiest story available for a culture that had no other framework for a powerful woman. But Livia's rumors were mild compared to what came next. A generation later, Claudius married a teenager named Messalina, and by the time Roman writers finished with her reputation, her name became shorthand, literally a Latin term used for excess and depravity for centuries afterward. The question is how much of that reputation she earned and how much of it was manufactured by people who needed her gone.
Here's what's actually documented about Messalina, stripped of the insults. She married Claudius around 38 AD when she was a teenager and he was decades older and already emperor. She gave him 2 children, including his heir, Britannicus. For years, ancient sources describe her wielding real influence at court, using her closeness to Claudius to destroy political rivals, several of whom conveniently died or were exiled after crossing her. Then, in 48 AD, she did something that historians across nearly 2,000 years still struggle to fully explain. While Claudius was away in Ostia, Messalina held a public marriage ceremony with a senator named Gaius Silius. Not a secret affair, a ceremony, witnesses, contracts, the full legal formality of a Roman wedding, while her actual husband was still alive and still emperor. Historians still debate her motive, and none of the ancient explanations quite add up on their own. Tacitus suggests reckless passion. Some modern historians have floated a political motive instead, a plot to install Silius on the throne, using Britannicus as the justification, with Messalina positioning herself to keep power either way. What's not disputed is what happened next. Claudius's advisors, terrified of what a legitimate rival marriage might mean for their own necks, raced back to Rome ahead of the emperor and got to him first. Before Claudius could fully process what he was hearing, the decision was made for him. Messalina was executed within hours, no trial resembling a fair one, a soldier sent to finish it, while she reportedly tried and failed to take her own life first. That's the documented core. Everything else, the lurid stories of secret brothels, of contests with prostitutes that Messalina supposedly won, comes from Roman satirists writing decades later, men who had every reason to turn a dead, politically inconvenient empress into the most extreme cautionary tale they could invent. Modern historians treat almost all of it as character assassination, not biography. And that brings us to the woman who learned from both of their stories and played the game far more carefully than either one, Claudius's next wife and Rome's most quietly powerful woman, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina the Younger didn't repeat Messalina's mistake. She didn't flaunt power, she built it, carefully, inside the system instead of around it. She married her own uncle, Claudius, in 49 AD, a union so close by Roman law that the Senate had to formally change the incest statutes to allow it. From there, she maneuvered her son from a previous marriage, a teenager named Nero, into position as Claudius's heir, ahead of Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Roman writers, including Tacitus and Suetonius, report that when Claudius died in 54 AD, purportedly from poisoned mushrooms, suspicion fell immediately on Agrippina. As with Livia, there's no confession, no trial, no hard proof, but the timing and the outcome left little doubt in the minds of contemporaries about who benefited. For the first years of Nero's reign, Agrippina wasn't a power behind the throne, she was arguably on it. Roman coins from this period show her face alongside her son's, a level of formal recognition almost unheard of for a woman. Ancient accounts describe her sitting in on meetings with foreign envoys, a breach of protocol so unusual that Nero's advisors reportedly had to invent an excuse to physically move her out of the room. It couldn't last. A son who owed his throne to his mother eventually resents being reminded of it. By 59 AD, Nero had her killed after one failed attempt involving a self-sinking boat that historians still find almost too strange to be fiction. She was finished off more directly. The son she'd spent 2 decades maneuvering into power ordered her death. So, look at the pattern across all 3 women. Livia, blamed for murders with no proof, mostly because a woman with Augustus's ear made people uneasy. Messalina, whose real ambition got buried under stories too lurid to have been anything but exaggeration. Agrippina, who came closer than almost any woman in Roman history to holding formal power outright and paid for it with her life, at her own son's order. The scandal was never really the point. The scandal was the story Rome told itself, so it wouldn't have to admit these women were simply good at politics.